Edgar.
¿Edgar qué?
Jiménez Lugo.
¿Cómo los ejecutaste?
Los degollé.
He was carrying out hits before most teenagers have finished high school. By 22, he was one of the most feared enforcement commanders on the entire U.S.-Mexico border. Not a foot soldier, not a corner runner, but a cartel hitman who earned his name because he left no one alive. His organization buried bodies in clandestine graves that search volunteers are still digging up today. His nickname is El Plaga, the plague. And just like a plague, he did not discriminate. He spread through Mexicali, Baja California, leaving a trail of executions that shook the entire northern Mexico underworld and put law enforcement on both sides of the border on high alert. And when they finally put handcuffs on him, the story somehow got even darker from there. But here is the thing. The real story of El Plaga is not just about the violence. It is about what happened after authorities finally caught him. Because what the Mexican government did next, or more accurately, what it failed to do, is one of the most stunning institutional collapses in the recent history of Mexican criminal justice. They arrested him. They charged him. They transferred him. And then they lost him, not in an escape, not in a jailbreak. The Mexican prison system simply could not locate one of the Sinaloa Cartel's most feared enforcement figures inside its own facilities. And while the government scrambled to explain where he had gone, a journalist received a video call from a man claiming to be El Plaga, driving through the streets of Mexicali, free, telling the reporter that his boss had arranged everything. This documentary is going to examine who Christian Alexis Mendoza Guillen actually is, according to public records, investigative journalism, and official government statements. We are going to walk through how he rose to command within the Los Russos enforcement structure. We are going to examine the violence linked to his organization and separate what the documented record actually shows from what exists only as street legend and online speculation. We are going to trace the extraordinary legal failures that defined his case and explain what his story reveals about the cartel war currently consuming communities across Baja California. And we are going to be honest about the line between verified fact and cartel mythology. Because in a conflict this deadly and this opaque, that line is everything. But before we get into all of that, you need to first understand the organization that made El Plaga possible, because you cannot understand the man without understanding the machine he served. Los Russos are not a cartel, they are a weapon. They are the primary enforcement arm of what U.S. federal agencies now call La Maestra, the dominant faction of the Sinaloa Cartel, aligned with longtime co-founder Ismael El Mayo Zambada Garca, one of the most enduring and elusive figures in the history of organized crime in the Western Hemisphere. While El Chapo Guzman attracted global attention through dramatic escapes and Hollywood mythology, El Mayo operated quietly for decades, building the infrastructure, the supply chains, and the enforcement networks that actually kept the Sinaloa Cartel functioning at scale. He was not arrested until July 2024. And by that point, he had outlasted virtually every rival and partner he had ever worked alongside. In August 2025, he entered a guilty plea in a United States federal court, formally acknowledging his role as a principal leader of one of the most violent and powerful drug trafficking organizations in the world. According to U.S. federal authorities, Los Russos were founded and led by a man known publicly as El Russo, identified in official documents as Juan Jos Ponce Flix, operating under multiple aliases including Jess Alejandro Snichez Flix. The DEA, the Department of Justice, and the Department of State spent more than a decade building a case against him. Over that period, Ponce Flix was indicted multiple times in the central and southern districts of California on charges covering racketeering conspiracy, violent crime in aid of racketeering, drug trafficking, hostage-taking, money laundering, and firearms violations. In September 2025, all three agencies jointly activated a $5 million reward under the Narcotics Rewards Program for information leading to his arrest and conviction. DEA Administrator Terrence Cole stated publicly that for years, Ponce Flix had resorted to kidnapping, torture, and murder to maintain his grip on power, and that the reward offer represented the administration's unwavering commitment to dismantling the Sinaloa Cartel. According to those federal allegations, Los Russos established full operational control over the Mexicali drug market beginning around 2020. What that meant in practice was sweeping and brutal. Independent criminal groups that had previously operated with some degree of autonomy within the broader Sinaloa umbrella were forced to submit, pay tribute, or disappear. The organization allegedly regulated not just drug sales, but human trafficking, loan sharking, slot machine operations, and vehicle duplication schemes across the city. Investigative reporting from Zeta Tijuana documented that under Los Russos' territorial dominance, the price and movement of methamphetamine, fentanyl, heroin, and cocaine across Mexicali were all controlled by a single command structure. This was not a franchise arrangement. This was monopoly enforcement, backed by lethal violence, imposed on a city of nearly 1 million people sitting directly on the California border. The broader criminal landscape in Baja California that Los Russos entered around 2020 was already contested. Remnants of the Arellano Flix organization still held ground across parts of the state. The Jalisco New Generation Cartel was pushing into Baja California, exploiting the power vacuum left by the Tijuana cartel's decline. In response, Los Russos consolidated alliances with other Mayo-aligned cells, most significantly the Arzate Garca brothers, La Rana and El Aquiles, whose organization reinforced Los Russos' position beyond the Mexicali Valley and provided the partnership that would later become operationally significant in the Ensenada corridor. Cipriano Alfonso Peralta Salazar, another senior Mayo-aligned operator, also worked in coordination with El Russo's network in the state. The architecture was layered, multiple allied cells across different parts of Baja California, with Los Russos as the primary enforcement mechanism in Mexicali. That redundancy meant that removing one operator, even a senior one, did not collapse the network. It adapted. The DEA further alleged that El Russo paid more than $1 million monthly in bribes to government officials, police personnel, and military figures in Mexico to maintain this operational protection. That figure, which has not been proven in a court of law, but has been repeated in official government statements by U.S. federal agencies, is essential context for everything that follows in this story. Because what happened to El Plaga inside the Mexican legal system cannot be understood outside of an institutional environment where, according to the federal government of the United States, criminal organizations were routinely purchasing the protection of the officials responsible for containing them. Now here is where El Plaga enters the picture. Christian Alexis Mendoza Guillen was not from Mexicali. He was from Culiacan, Sinaloa, the cartel's historical heartland and one of the primary recruitment pools for enforcement personnel deployed to expansion territories like Baja California. Investigators and journalists who tracked his trajectory place his entry into the Sinaloa cartel structure somewhere in his mid-teens. That is not unusual within the documented patterns of how cells like Los Russos have historically built their enforcement rosters. Academic research on organized crime in northwestern Mexico consistently documents the recruitment of adolescent males from economically marginalized neighborhoods in Sinaloa's urban centers. The initial roles are low-level, surveillance work, monitoring law enforcement movement, running messages through chain-of-command structures designed to protect senior operators from direct exposure. Young men who demonstrate reliability and a willingness to absorb the risks of more serious activity are progressively elevated. Financial returns escalate alongside the danger. By the time a recruit reaches his late teens, the combination of material dependency, organizational loyalty, and the social cost of attempting to exit makes leaving functionally difficult for most. In Culiac specifically, proximity to cartel operations has been a feature of daily life for multiple generations. Entire neighborhoods exist in complex relationships with the criminal organizations whose money flows through local economies, whose enforcement operations define local security conditions, and whose cultural production, through narco corridos, social media influence, and conspicuous displays of consumption, shapes what success and power look like to young people growing up inside those communities. Researchers who have studied this environment describe it not as simple predatory recruitment, but as something more embedded, a social ecosystem in which the cartel functions simultaneously as an economic force, a security apparatus, a cultural institution, and a pathway to status that alternative institutions have repeatedly failed to provide. To understand why someone like Mendoza Guillen would follow that road, you have to understand what the road looks like from the inside. Researchers who have studied cartel recruitment in Sinaloa consistently describe an environment in which the organization functions not as an external threat, but as the dominant social institution of the neighborhood, providing income, a form of security, and status in communities where legitimate pathways to those things have been systematically blocked. Young men growing up in this environment are not making a clear-eyed choice between a criminal life and a lawful one. They are navigating a world where the cartel is already everywhere, and the question is not whether to engage with it, but how. The move from Culiacan to Mexicali was consistent with a documented pattern in how El Russo's organization expanded its territorial footprint, deploying senior enforcement figures from Sinaloa's established criminal networks into new operational areas to impose discipline and provide capacity that locally recruited personnel could not yet supply. Mendoza Guillen's reported relationships within the Los Russos hierarchy were embedded in exactly this structure, connecting him upward to El Russo's command and downward to the enforcement cell that became Los Russos. By his early 20s, Mendoza Guillen had not just survived that pipeline, he had risen to the top of it within the Los Russos enforcement structure. Journalist Luis Chaparro, reporting for Crash Out Media alongside Io and Grillo, described the individual he interviewed as someone who had spent approximately a decade inside a Sinaloa cartel faction. If that timeline is accurate, El Plaga was embedded in this world before he was old enough to legally drive. The name he carried, he later explained publicly, reflected what he believed he was to his enemies, something that spread and consumed and left nothing standing. Whether that is biography or bravado is impossible to verify independently. What investigators confirmed was that by the time his name appeared in intelligence reporting, he was attached to enforcement operations at a command level. Someone with authority over other operators, not someone taking orders from the bottom of a hierarchy. That operational profile matters because it defines what authorities believed El Plaga actually did within Los Russos. Enforcement cells in cartel structures serve a specific organizational function. They enforce territorial rules, they respond to challenges from rival organizations, they discipline internal defectors and manage accountability within the cell. They communicate through violence what consequences follow non-compliance with the organization's authority. They are the mechanism through which criminal organizations translate financial power into physical dominance over a city or a region. In Mexicali, that function belonged to Los Russos as a whole, and investigators believed El Plaga was one of the people executing it at a command level, directing operations and holding authority over the gunmen below him in the hierarchy. Now listen closely, because this is where the documented record stops being about organizations and starts being about specific people, specific places, and specific blood. To understand the full scope of what investigators connected to Christian Alexis Mendoza Guillen, you cannot start in Mexicali. You have to start years earlier, in Ensenada and Tijuana, where a teenage hitman named El Plaga was already building a reputation long before Los Russos came calling. According to investigative reporting by Zeta Tijuana and confirmed by multiple subsequent sources, El Plaga's criminal career began not with Los Russos, but with the Arzate Garca brothers, Ren and Alfonso, known respectively as La Rana and El Aquiles, who operated as one of El Mayo's primary enforcement arms along Baja California's Pacific coast. He started working for the Arzate network between 2017 and 2020, deployed across Tijuana, the Ejido das Ordaz corridor, and the San Quintin area of Ensenada. He was not yet old enough to legally drink in the United States. He had already been detained twice, in 2015 and 2016, at 15 and 16 years old respectively, by Baja California State Police for carrying unlicensed firearms. In 2018, he was arrested again, this time on charges of carrying military-exclusive weapons and possessing restricted cartridges. Each arrest produced minimal legal consequence. Each time, he returned to the streets and to the organization. By 2020, he had relocated to Mexicali, now operating directly under El Russo's command within the Los Russos structure. Zeta Tijuana's reporting identified him as the leader of an internal enforcement cell called Los Russos, a unit dedicated primarily to contract killings, street-level drug distribution, and human trafficking operations in the Colonia Progreso neighborhood and surrounding areas. He was described by intelligence sources as one of El Russo's most trusted armed operators. And the narco corrido world had already noticed. A corrido released by Revolver Cannabis in 2019 referenced him by name and alias, describing him as someone carrying venom, lead, and bullets, toxic to those who crossed him, operating a marked cell across Baja California. The song used both his El Plaga alias and his secondary nickname, El Murillo, the same name investigators connected to his earlier years working for the Arzate organization. That history, the Arzate years, the Los Zorros cell, the bridging role between two of La Maiza's most violent enforcement structures in Baja California, is what put El Plaga's name in the middle of the most violent single incident in Ensenada in more than 2 decades. On May 20, 2023, an off-road vehicle rally called El Catanillazo was winding through Baja California's Pacific corridor, with competitors traveling south in open-air Razor vehicles. The route passed through the town of San Vicente, approximately 100 kilometers south of Ensenada, near the kilometer 90 marker of the Transpeninsular Highway. At 2:18 in the afternoon, armed men descended from an Infiniti QX60 and opened fire on the rally participants. When the shooting stopped, 10 people were dead and 10 more wounded, including a minor. The primary target was Alonso Armbolapia, known by the aliases El Turbol, El Lancho, and El Sonrix, a figure that Baja California's Attorney General, Ricardo Ivan Carpio Sniches, publicly confirmed was the focal point of the attack. El Turbol was found dead in his blue and green Razor, which had a clover insignia on the front and the number 15 painted on its side. Investigators identified him as a trafficking figure connected to the Arellano Flix organization, the remnant of the once dominant Tijuana cartel, who had been challenging Sinaloa-aligned groups for control of the Ensenada trafficking corridor. His partner, Mariana Soto, died alongside him. Jose Eduardo Orozco Gil, the municipal delegate for San Antonio de las Minas in Ensenada's Wine Valley, was also killed in the attack. A man identified only as Ivan, alias Scarface, was also reportedly among the dead and believed to be another Arellano Flix-aligned figure. The assassins had tracked El Tribal through TikTok. He and his circle had posted publicly about attending the rally, his location visible to anyone watching his account. Investigators said the hit team had been monitoring him for at least 2 days before the shooting. Baja California's Attorney General confirmed at a press conference that the assault was a confrontation between the Sinaloa Cartel and the Arellano Flix organization. But Zeta Tijuana's investigation went deeper. The reporting identified the cell behind the attack as Los Russos, the enforcement unit that investigators had placed under El Plaga's command. The investigation described El Plaga's cell as the structural bridge between Los Russos and the Arsate Garca organization, and characterized the Cachinillazo massacre as the operational product of that alliance, a coordinated hit against an Arellano Flix figure competing for roots and territory in the region. Weapons recovered at the scene were later connected by ballistic analysis to 4 additional murders. This was not a spontaneous confrontation. It was a planned operation carried out by a cell that investigators believed El Plaga had built and commanded. El Plaga was in prison when the massacre occurred, arrested 7 months earlier in November 2022. Zeta Tijuana's reporting placed him as the organizational head of the cell, not necessarily the trigger man present at the scene. Whether Los Russos executed the Cachinillazo under command structures El Plaga had established before his arrest, or under direction from other figures after his detention, is a question the public record does not definitively resolve. What investigators established through their post-massacre inquiry is that the cell connected to his leadership was the unit behind the attack. Now here is where things get personal in a different way. On November 28, 2024, a man who had been navigating El Plaga's legal chaos on his behalf was ambushed in Mexicali. El Plaga's own defense attorney was attacked by 4 men, masked, dressed in black, while sitting in the passenger seat of a dark Honda Accord. The gunmen shot him multiple times and fled in a black BMW. He died at the scene. A subsequent police operation produced 1 arrest and the seizure of 3 long guns, though authorities indicated the detained individual was not believed to be connected to the homicide. The killing of a defense attorney representing a senior cartel enforcement figure, executed in broad daylight by a coordinated team, sent a message in the language of the conflict that required no translation for anyone paying attention. Then there is the night of November 19, 2022 itself, the confrontation that finally put handcuffs on El Plaga and set every subsequent institutional failure into motion. El Plaga was traveling with 2 associates after a night out when state police spotted his white Jeep Rubicon moving at excessive speed through Colonia Alamitos. Officers signaled the vehicle to stop. The occupants fled. Near the Avenida Jupiter, the men exited the vehicle armed and turned on the officers. One of El Plaga's companions, Benito Beltran Zepeda, known as El To, was killed in the firefight. A second associate, Felipe Eduardo Barajas Lozano, alias El Omega, was arrested alongside El Plaga. But here is the detail that Zeta Tijuana's reporting surfaced from police footage that most coverage missed entirely. Body camera and municipal police unit video from that night showed that El Plaga himself did not discharge a weapon during the confrontation. The prosecution's entire attempted homicide case against him was built not on footage of him shooting at officers, but on the allegation that he ordered El To to open fire. That distinction between pulling the trigger and giving the order defined the legal architecture of his case, contributed to the judicial fragility that allowed multiple charges to collapse, and ultimately fed the institutional failures that let him walk free. Elto died on that street following an order prosecutors attributed to El Plaga. El Omega went to prison. El Plaga went through a legal process so thoroughly compromised that by October 2023, a Mexican judge could not find him inside the country's own prison system. The rivalry driving all of this violence was not between Los Russos and an outside organization, it was internal. Los Chapitos, the faction led by the sons of El Chapo Guzman, had been part of the same Sinaloa cartel as the Mayo faction for decades before the relationship collapsed. The specific trigger that ignited open warfare was El Mayo Zambada's arrest in July 2024, which the Mayo faction publicly attributed to betrayal by Los Chapitos. The Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project documented that gang-on-gang clashes in Sinaloa nearly quadrupled in the 8 months following El Mayo's arrest compared to the prior period. Levels ACL described as unprecedented since it began tracking Mexico in 2018. That escalation spread directly into Baja California. Narcomanta banners attributed to Los Chapitos appeared on Mexicali bridges, naming specific state security officers for alleged collaboration with Los Russos. In June 2024, authorities arrested 5 members of a Los Salazar cell linked to Los Chapitos for Molotov cocktail attacks on commercial establishments tied to extortion disputes. In July 2026, Los Russos killed 2 state security officers in a retaliatory strike after authorities neutralized one of their senior figures. One officer's wife also killed in the second attack. The war was no longer being fought in shadows. It was on the streets, in the public record, and in the body count that Mexicali had been accumulating since Los Russos arrived in 2020. 266 murders in 2022, 181 in 2023, 204 in 2024, and climbing again into 2025. Now here is the part that no one actually talks about, because it is the most revealing element of this entire story. On November 19, 2022, elements of Baja California's State Security Force observed a white Jeep Rubicon traveling at excessive speed through the Colonia Alamitos neighborhood of Mexicali. When officers signaled the vehicle to stop, its occupants fled. In the pursuit that followed, armed occupants of the vehicle opened fire on the officers. The confrontation ended with one of Mendoza Guillen's companions shot dead at the scene. Mendoza Guillen himself was taken into custody. Officers recovered 3 magazines loaded with 9mm cartridges and an additional magazine with 7.28 caliber ammunition. He was approximately 22 years old at the time of the arrest. The initial charge was possession of magazines restricted to exclusive military use. 11 days after the arrest, a federal judge determined this charge did not warrant preventive detention and ordered him released. The Baja California State Attorney's Office immediately rearrested him on a charge of attempted homicide against the security agents who had been fired upon during the pursuit. That second detention sent him to Cerrizo No. 2, the facility known as El Hongo, located near the municipality of Tecate. But here is where it gets dark in ways that go beyond the violence itself. On July 6, 2023, prison authorities initiated a transfer order moving Mendoza Guillen from El Hongo to a federal maximum security facility. The paperwork designated Federal Readaptation Social Center No. 3 as the destination and listed it as being located in the state of Oaxaca. The actual Ceferezo No. 3 is located in the state of Tamaulipas, on the opposite side of the country. When the transfer was processed, Oaxacan authorities reported no record of receiving the prisoner. When an October 2023 hearing arrived to modify his preventive detention conditions, the judge of control in Mexicali formally recorded Christian Alexis Mendoza Guillen as perdido o no localizado, lost or not located. The Mexican government had officially misplaced one of the Sinaloa Cartel's most significant enforcement figures somewhere inside its own detention infrastructure. Neither his legal counsel nor the prison system could confirm where he was. The question of whether this represented administrative incompetence, deliberate corruption facilitated by the bribery network the DIA alleged El Russo maintained with government officials, or some combination of both, was never officially resolved in public proceedings. But if you do the math, you can see how the two things connect. An organization that the United States government alleges was paying over $1 million monthly in institutional bribes does not need to organize a dramatic jailbreak. It needs to corrupt a transfer document. What happened next made this case internationally known. Journalists Eoin Grillo and Luis Chaparro, through their publication Crash Out Media, conducted a video call interview with a man who identified himself as El Plaga and claimed to be free, operating in Mexicali, and conducting business as usual. The individual on the call was slim and youthful in appearance, matching photographs released following the 2022 arrest. He produced identification bearing the name Christian Alexis Mendoza Guillen. He spoke with knowledge of internal cartel operations described by those who reviewed the interview as consistent with someone at his alleged organizational level. He told the journalists he had been allowed to leave, that El Russo had negotiated an arrangement with Mexican authorities that secured his freedom. You see, the Mexican government officially listed him as a federal prisoner. He appeared, on camera, to be driving freely through the border city his organization controlled. Both realities could not simultaneously exist within a functioning institutional framework. Baja California's Secretary of Security was eventually compelled to address the situation publicly, confirming to reporters that El Plaga was indeed free, announcing that the state would conduct surveillance on him, and noting that authorities did not currently hold an active judicial warrant against Mendoza Guillen in Baja California. According to subsequent reporting from Infobay Mexico, he ultimately completed a process of 3.5 years in detention before being formally released from Federal Reinsertion Social Center number 13 in Miahuatlán de Porfirio Daz, Oaxaca. The only charge for which he served documented time was the original weapons possession count, possession of restricted military magazines. A fine of approximately 3,000 pesos was reported as having been forgiven at the time of his release. To put that into context, the man investigators identified as a senior enforcement commander for the Sinaloa Cartel's most feared enforcement cell in Baja California served time on a weapons possession charge and walked free. The attempted homicide charge connected to a shootout that killed one of his companions and resulted in gunfire against state security officers did not produce a sustained detention. That is not a story about one bad outcome in an otherwise functional system. That is a story about institutional penetration so deep that the legal process itself became a mechanism the organization could navigate. But ironically, and this is something no one actually talks about, El Plaga's reputation grew larger during his legal odyssey than it had been before his arrest. By late 2023, he reportedly maintained an Instagram account with 60,000 followers, while the Mexican government officially classified him as a federal prisoner somewhere in its own system. That number reflects something beyond personal vanity. It reflects how deliberately figures in the cartel world now use digital platforms as organizational infrastructure, building identity, demonstrating survival, signaling power, and recruiting the next generation of enforcement personnel through the same attention economy that everyone else on those platforms is competing within. Narco corridos operate on the same logic through music. The tradition of ballads glorifying criminal figures along the border stretches back to the 19th century, but it exploded into a global phenomenon once YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram gave this content the distribution power of the algorithmic attention machine. By the time a corrido about a specific figure reaches millions of plays, the distance between the song and the documented reality of what that person actually did has grown so large it is essentially unmeasurable. The music constructs mythology. The mythology recruits. And the people doing the recruiting are not the ones absorbing the consequences of what they are selling. The interview itself revealed something beyond El Plaga's personal circumstances. A senior enforcement figure, officially listed as a federal prisoner, was freely discussing internal cartel dynamics on camera, confident in his organization's ability to protect him from the consequences. He described the war between Los Russos and Los Chapitos not as an observer, but as a participant with command-level knowledge. And he did it with 60,000 Instagram followers watching. 'Cause in the cartel information landscape of 2023, publicly projecting invulnerability was itself a form of enforcement. Rivals see it. Recruits see it. Local officials weighing whether to cooperate with law enforcement see it. The interview was not a lapse in operational security. It was a demonstration of organizational power. Security researchers documented in 2025 that Mexican cartels had developed sophisticated digital strategies exploiting mainstream social platforms as mechanisms for narrative control, specifically targeting younger demographics who may perceive cartel figures not as criminals, but as alternative power structures in communities where legitimate institutions have failed to deliver security, economic opportunity, or social belonging. Social media influencers with cartel affiliations were being tracked and targeted for assassination by rival factions during this period, which illustrates how seriously criminal organizations took the information dimension of their conflicts. The digital presence of figures like El Plaga was not incidental to the cartel operation. It was part of the operational ecosystem, part of the machinery through which violence is normalized, power is performed, and the next wave of young men from Culiacan are shown a version of this life stripped of everything it actually costs them and the people around them. The human cost of everything described in this documentary exists in specific neighborhoods, in specific families, in the particular texture of a city that has spent years living inside the consequences of organized violence on a scale most people watching this cannot fully imagine. The search collectives who found those 15 bodies in Colonia Miguel Alem were volunteers, predominantly women, predominantly mothers and sisters and daughters, searching for family members who disappeared into the violence and never came back. They carry GPS devices. They photograph soil disturbances. They cross-reference disappearance reports with geographic intelligence about areas where organizations are known to dispose of bodies. They do this work in a city that documented more than 1,200 murders across a single administrative period, knowing that the organizations responsible for the graves sometimes monitor their movements. Their work fills a forensic and investigative gap that official institutions have not consistently filled. They do it without compensation and without institutional protection, in spaces defined by danger that they did not create and cannot control. The nightclubs firebombed in 2024 were not abstract properties. They were livelihoods built by people who had nothing to do with the cartel conflict consuming the city around them. Small business owners across Mexicali navigated extortion demands with no meaningful recourse from authorities who were themselves targets of organized violence. The Mexicali Municipal Police Director resigned in July 2025 amid the sustained pressure of the ongoing conflict. His replacement had not fully assumed command before a retaliatory operation killed his deputy commander and left a widow behind. The warning banners stretched across city bridges, naming specific officers for assassination, were not abstract threats. They were declarations of intent that real human beings had to read and respond to with their own lives, their own safety calculations, their own families' futures. The only question left to answer right now is this: what does El Plaga's story actually tell us, and who does it say something about? Following El Mayo's July 2024 arrest, reporting from Zeta Tijuana indicated that senior Los Russos figures retreated from Mexicali proper, relocating to communities in Durango and Sinaloa while maintaining their Baja California presence through mid-level commanders. That geographic dispersal made the network harder to decapitate through targeted operations without meaningfully degrading its functional reach. Few communities saw improvement in security conditions as a result of the restructuring. Investigators noted ongoing challenges tracking command structures that were now spread across multiple states. As of June 2026, Baja California Security Secretary publicly confirmed that El Plaga was free and that the state was monitoring the situation. There is no public indication of active federal charges against Mendoza Guillen in Mexico at the time of this documentary. The $5 million reward for El Russo remains active. The Los Russos network, despite sustained law enforcement pressure on multiple fronts and the internal turbulence that followed El Mayo's arrest and his subsequent guilty plea in August 2025, continues to operate along one of the most critical drug trafficking corridors in the world, the border between Mexicali and Calexico, California, directly across from communities in the Imperial Valley that are living with the downstream consequences of everything that happens on the other side of that line. Other agencies are watching. The DIA's Los Angeles Field Division has made the pursuit of this network a stated priority. The Foreign Terrorist Organization designation, applied to the Sinaloa Cartel in February 2025, expanded the legal tools available to U.S. prosecutors pursuing cartel leadership. But even if those tools produce additional indictments, even if El Russo is eventually captured and prosecuted, the conditions that produced El Plaga, that continue producing young men like him in Culiacan and across northwestern Mexico, are not addressed by any individual arrest. The conditions that made it possible for a senior cartel enforcement figure to navigate the Mexican legal system from arrest to freedom through a combination of prosecutorial irregularities, institutional corruption, and transfer document errors are not fixed by placing one more name on a wanted list. If other law enforcement agencies or governments try to replicate what Mexico attempted with El Plaga, arrest, charge, detain, and contain, without addressing the institutional penetration that allowed him to walk free on the other side, they are more likely to reproduce the failure than achieve anything meaningfully different. The conditions that enabled his survival within the system are specific to an institutional environment where, according to the federal government of the United States, criminal organizations were paying millions of dollars monthly to remain protected from exactly the systems supposed to hold them accountable. The trajectory of Christian Alexis Mendoza Guillen from a teenager in Culiacan who entered the enforcement structure of one of the world's most powerful criminal organizations to a senior hitman operating along the most scrutinized border in the Western Hemisphere by his early 20s is not a story about exceptional individual evil. It is a story about recruitment, about the communities that produce recruits, about organizations that absorb young men and transform them into enforcement tools, and about the institutional environment that failed at every level, from street enforcement to prison transfer paperwork to courtroom procedure, to interrupt that cycle at any meaningful point. His case illustrates how young recruits can become entangled in cycles of organized violence with devastating consequences, not just for themselves, but for every community that exists in the space around them. The mythology says there is power available in these organizations for those willing to pay the price. The documented record shows what that price actually looks like, measured in bodies excavated from Colonia Miguel Alem, in officers killed in retaliatory strikes and the families they left behind, in a border city where the murder count exceeded 1,200 in a single administrative term, in women with GPS devices searching ground that should never have become a grave. El Plaga's story is not finished, but the communities his organization operated inside have been living with the consequences of that story for years. And the lasting legacy of this chapter, whoever writes the ending, will not be measured in Corrido plays or Instagram followers. It will be measured in what Mexicali looks like for the people who stayed, who searched, who buried their dead, and who kept trying to build something in the space between the violence long after every cartel figure who defined this period is gone, and long after the organizations that produced them have already moved on to the next name, the next corrido, and the next young recruit from Culiacan, who has not yet been shown what the end of this road actually looks like. Not the mythology, not the music, but the real and documented thing.